I was really honored to be asked to be the Toastmaster for LTUE. I've come many, many years, and I love coming to LTUE. I love the community here, the writing community in Utah. I love how supportive we are, and I love how much information there is, and I love how friendly everybody is, and I love the enthusiasm everybody has here for writing, because we're all here following our dreams, trying to figure out what it is that we want to do, write books, read books, edit books, whatever it is, and we have this kind of community and support to help us do that. So I want everybody to think about what it is that their dream is. It could be something small, it could be something near, it could be something wild and crazy. It doesn't even have to do with books or writing. I just want you to think about what it is that your secret heart dream is about. Okay? I'm not going to ask you what it is. This is not a test. I just want you to think about it. For me, growing up, my dream was always about books. I grew up in a house where words were honored and cherished, and we recognized how powerful they were, and we recognized how valuable they were. My mom was a writer, my mom was an editor, and so I grew up learning how to read, I grew up learning how to write and how to edit, and I loved it. I loved the story. One of my early memories was taking a copy of The Secret Garden to my mom and saying, "Would you read this to me?" I was 3 at the time. And I said, "Would you read this to me?" And we sat in the big green rocking chair in the living room, and she read The Secret Garden to me. And I still remember that very, very vividly, because that was the first sort of book that sparked that love of story in me. And so I grew up watching my mom and realizing that being a writer was a thing people did. Like, that was a job. And so I said that I'm going to be a writer. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write everything. I'm going to be on the New York Times bestseller list when I'm like 15 years old. It's going to be great. And so that's what I did. I wrote short stories, and I wrote really bad poetry, and I wrote more short stories, and I learned how to plot, and I learned how to do character development, and I read everything, and all my friends had me edit their stuff. And then I went to middle school, and that little voice in the back of my head said, "You know what, actually, maybe you're not as good at this as you think you are. Maybe writing is actually something other people do. Maybe that's not really in the cards for you. You should probably stop writing." And I did. And I put that dream on the shelf, and I said, "Man, that was fun while it lasted. But it's not me. I'm not good at it. I can't be good at it. It's not going to work." And I listened to that voice for a really, really long time. But I still loved words. I still loved books, right? They were in my soul, and I thought, well, okay, if I can't be a writer, because I'm not good enough to be a writer, what can I do to still be involved in books? And I remember I was in the bookstore one day, and we browsing, and I did what everybody does at the bookstore. I picked a book off the shelf, and I flipped it over, and I read the stuff on the back of the book, and suddenly I thought, who writes the stuff on the back of the book? Because I could do that, right? I could read the book early. I'd have early access to the book, because I'd have to read it early, and even though I'm not a writer, even though I'm a bad writer, I can't do it, I could probably be okay to pull a couple paragraphs together, right? That's all they need, a couple paragraphs. So that's what I wanted. What do I do to be the person that writes the stuff on the back of the book? Turns out editors write the stuff on the back of the book. And because my mom was an editor for the Ensign magazine, I knew that was a job people did, right? I could learn how to do that. So that was the beginning of my path, where I said, I'm going to be an editor. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to be an editor, and I'm going to write the stuff on the back of the book. And so that's what I did. I went to the University of Utah, and I got my degree in English, and when everybody said, "Oh, you're an English major, you must want to be a teacher," and I said, "No, I want to be an editor," and they'd all say, "Can you do that with an English degree?" Yes, you can. And so that's what I did. I graduated in 4 years. I learned how to edit. My mom and I had long conversations about the glorious placement of semicolons and how beautiful they can be. And I, at 4 months to the day from when I graduated from college, I was working professionally at Bookcraft as their editorial assistant. And I was in, and and I had my dream, and I was there, and I was so happy. And so for 10 years, I worked as an editor, and for 10 years, the only thing that I wrote was the stuff on the back of other people's books, which I didn't mind because I still got to read them, and I loved it, and it was enough for me because I'm not really a writer. I'm not a good writer. I knew that from when I was very, very young. I wasn't a good writer because I kept telling myself that. And then one day, I went to a writing conference with my friend Chris Schobinger that I worked with. We were going down to a writing conference full of YA authors, and I was just driving down. I was thinking, I wonder what I would write about if I was going to write a YA book. And just like that, I had this beautiful idea about this trilogy and about this girl and this boy, and it was going to be time travel, and I knew where the book 1 was going to end, and I knew where book 2 was going to start, and I knew where book 3 was going to start, and I had it all planned out on the drive to Provo. And when I got there, I wrote everything down on the back of somebody else's manuscript that I had in the car, and I was so excited, and I went into Chris's, and he was there, and I'm like, Chris, look at this story, look how amazing it is, and there's this thing, and here's this great line of dialogue that's going to be in the book, and he was like, when did you do this? I'm like, on the drive down, it doesn't matter, look how brilliant this is. And he's like, you should write this. I'm like, of course I'm going to write it, it's going to be the best book in the history of ever. He's like, good. But it meant that now I really had to do it, which was kind of surprising and scary for me. But luckily, just a few years earlier than that, my friend Tony at work had said, we should start a writing group. And we kind of heard that you kind of sort of maybe would want to write. And I thought, well, no, I'm not a writer. But okay, I can help, I can come. So I did, and that writing group had prompted me to practice again and to take a little bit of that dust, shake a little bit of that dust off my dream about being a writer, and it gave me it was a joyous place to fail. It was a safe place to succeed. It was my friends. We talked. We discussed stories. They didn't care that I was a bad writer, and they encouraged me and they supported me, and that was part of what gave me the confidence when I had this idea to say, this is going to be the best book in the history of books ever. I knew it. And I wrote Hourglass Door in 8 months, and it was awesome, and Shadow Mountain published it, and they published the sequel, The Golden Spiral, and they published the sequel to that, The Forgotten Locket, and just that fast, that dream that I had on the shelf from when I was in junior high, I just grabbed it off the shelf, I just pulled it open, and I never looked back. And I realized that voice, that doubt that I had embraced for all of those years that said, the dream you're dreaming is not for you, was a lie. And I regret having believed that for so long, because now I look back and I think, what could I have done in all of those years when I believed that my dream was not for me? That was a really important thing for me to come to terms with and come to believe and realize that the dream that I have is actually the dream that is for me. Excuse me. My books went on to win some awards. I have continued to work in publishing. I've continued to be an editor. I've continued to love story. I've continued to talk to people about stories and encourage them to follow their dreams and write the stories that are in their heart. It was a really interesting journey for me because of that, because of how I feel about it. And so there are a couple things that I sort of learned about this journey that I wanted to share with you. The first is about making writing a priority. This came about in one of the very first meetings that we had with my writing group, where Tony, we all sat down. It was me and Tony from HR and 3 people from accounting. That was our group, and we met on Thursdays after work in the library, and we just were figuring it out. And he said, I want this group to be important. I want us to take it seriously. And he told us this story about when he was coming home from work one day on the bus, and the bus stopped in front of this old ramshackle, burnt, house, no grass, no shutters, no fence, and parked in the driveway was a perfect, pristine, top-of-the-line, polished white Lamborghini. And Tony looked at that and he thought to himself, there's a man with priorities. They might not be the right priorities, but he has them. And he bought the Lamborghini and parked it in front of his house. And he said, I want this writing group, I want us to buy the Lamborghini. I want us to make sure that writing is a priority for us. I don't want to just be a someday writer, I want to be a today writer. And I've thought a lot about that because writing does take time. It takes energy and effort. It can be terrifying and it can be beautiful at the same time. And you can always find a reason to not write. There's always dishes that need to be done. You've always got to go to the grocery store. There's always a TV show that you want to watch that maybe you need to sleep more than, 4 hours a night. And you have to make choices. And if you continue to put writing or whatever your dream is on the bottom of that list, you're never going to get there. And so you have to make it a priority, even if it may require some sacrifices. The second thing that I learned is that sometimes your dream can change. And that's okay. For many, many years, my dream was to be a writer. And then for many, many years, my dream was to be an editor. And luckily for me, I was able to combine those two dreams and do them both, which not very many people can do in my profession. And I feel very grateful and very lucky that I'm able to do that. And that's okay. If you have your heart set on a particular path and your life starts to take a different turn, and you realize that your dream is changing and what you thought you wanted maybe is something different, it's okay to follow that new dream. It's okay to set aside what you thought you might want in exchange for something better. The third thing that I learned is a quote from Disneyland, which is my very favorite place to go. My husband and I go all the time, and it's truly a magical place. And one year we were there in Innovations, which is over by Space Mountain. And now they've got all the Marvel Avengers in there, which is also cool. But it used to be even cooler. And they had this wall of inspirational quotes. And I was walking past, and it said, "Don't worry, don't hurry, don't stop." And I loved that. And I have thought about that often because in writing especially, don't hurry your way through the journey. Don't be in such a rush to get to the next thing, to just find the next agent or send out the next query or just finish the next book. Don't be in such a hurry that you miss the fun of actually writing your story down, that you miss out on the connections that you can make from coming to places like LTUE. And don't worry if you don't get it right the first time. And don't worry if it's hard, because it will be. And don't worry if you get a rejection letter, because maybe next time it won't be. And don't worry that maybe other people don't understand what you're trying to say. The most important thing is you just don't stop. If this is what you truly want, if this is something inside of you that says, I can't let it go, then you have to sit down and do the work and you just can't stop. And that leads me to the fourth thing that I learned, which is that I firmly believe, even after all of these years, that there is a story inside each of us that only you can tell. There's a gazillion stories in the world, there's only so many plots, and we've all heard them all, and we don't care, because the way we tell that particular story is the only way that we can tell it. And your voice matters. The way you see the world matters. The way you tell a story matters. And we need your voice. We need your perspective on the world. We need the stories that only you can tell. That's how we learn about each other. That's how we can empathize with each other. That's how we build this community and how we share story. Because the way I tell it is going to be different than the way you tell it. And we need both of those voices. What am I up to? 5? I think I'm up to 5. Clearly I didn't learn how to count. That's part of my thing. The last thing that I learned is that the dream that you have is actually so much closer than you think. I want everybody to raise your hand as high as you can. Now I want you to raise your hand a little bit higher. Did you see what happened? Did you feel it? I told you all to raise your hand as high as you can, and you all did. You all did. And then when I said just go a little bit higher, you all could. And it was that close. And if you knew your dream was that close, what would you not do to stretch just a little bit further, or do just a little bit more, or be just a little bit braver to get that dream? Because it truly is as close as that. Whatever it is that you thought of at the beginning of this, whatever that dream is, your middle school self that tells you that that is not a dream worth dreaming is a liar. And if you are still listening to that voice, if you are still believing that voice, I would encourage you to find a way to silence that voice and reach just a little bit higher. Because whatever it is that you want, you can get. And I'm so grateful that I came from a family of words and came from a family of story. I'm grateful that I have found my voice and I'm able to share that with people. I'm grateful that I'm able to help other people find their voice in the stories that they write and the stories that they share. And I'm grateful that you gave me this opportunity to share a little bit about my journey and a little bit about what I learned. And I hope you all tell the stories that are in your heart, and I hope you all share them with us always. Thank you.